What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Game Dev Unchained, the #1 podcast about game development and the lifestyle thereof. I am your host, Brandon Pham, and with me, a special guest, Scott. Oh my God. I should have asked how to say your last name.
Millard, as it's written.
All right, perfect. I'm usually really bad at that. So Scott, this is the point of the podcast where I ask our guests, such as yourself, to introduce yourself to the listeners out there, who you are, where you've been, where you at, and where you're heading.
Okay, well, Brandon, thanks very much for having me. My name is Scott Millard, as we discovered, but essentially I'm the managing director of Feardemic, and Feardemic is a publishing label engaged in the sacred business of publishing games, and we're an offshoot of Bloober Team. Although we're fairly new, we are an offshoot of Bloober Team, and people may know Bloober Team from Layers of Fear, from The Observer, from Blair Witch, and the up-and-coming game, The Medium. Now, before coming to the world of independent games, I've been in the games industry for a very, very long time. I got my start at a company called Sega, which was several years later bought by Infogrames, which was then renamed Atari and then sold to Namco Bandai. And by the end of that sort of run of 15 years or so, I was the managing director of Namco Bandai in Southeast Asia and in Korea. I left that and pursued a consultancy helping other companies such as Bethesda set up their distribution throughout Asia, Turtle Beach, and THQ. And I've come to Poland specifically because Poland is kind of like the development epicenter of the independent games world, or the mainstream games world at the moment. There's a lot of fantastic games and content coming here. And then pandemic struck. So so that's where I've been and where I'm at the moment.
Oh man, you have quite the resume and many years in the industry. And this is very interesting. The main meat of the topic I do want to talk to you about is distributed work. But as we have discussed, we'll go off tangent because you have such a breadth of experience in the game industry. Feardemic, as you mentioned, and I think I've read somewhere on your website that you guys pretty much started at the beginning of this pandemic. Was it around there, or was at least the gem idea was before the pandemic? How did that out come to place?
Well, the actual honest answer to that is that Feardemic is an older company. It's been around for some time. In fact, Feardemic was the original Bloober Team, and it was called WFH Games, Work for Hire Games, and that's how Bloober Team got their start. Basically, working for other companies, and then another company was created, and Feardemic sort of sat there dormant for a long time. But yes, just before the pandemic, we kind of were finding our legs and getting organized, and suddenly pandemic came along, and we were forced to kind of rethink how we did things. But I suppose I do have to preface the sort of difficulties that we've had with the fact that we've been very, very lucky that we work in an industry that's allowed us to continue working. So many people have had such a rough time of this. They've lost their jobs, they've lost their businesses, or worse, or lost their loved ones. So really, the games industry has been very, very fortunate to be able to sort of transition into a sort of a work from home environment. But so that said, there has been some interesting challenges, as well as some interesting opportunities that have kind of appeared out of this sort of difficult situation.
Yeah, our industry has been kind of resilient for the very reason that we've been mostly digitized. I think back 2008, the housing market crash. We were somewhat recession proof, where I felt like developers were still working, we were still delivering things on deadlines, and that didn't really hit us as hard as other industries. And the same with this, in a weird way. I would hear family and friends losing their jobs and not being able to work, or having the transition being so tough where, the companies had to figure things out, and basically everyone had to be on furlough and just had to wait around, right? Our game industry hasn't really missed a beat, and just continue working. So there seems to be a lot of factors towards that. I think you were in the thick of it. Would you kind of talk about, that transition? Of course, there were challenges. It wasn't so easy, but like, what were the challenges that you guys were facing that the whole world can relate to?
Yeah, well, I think, initially it felt like opportunity. So we essentially had to rethink the way that we did things. We didn't feel restrained by a physical environment anymore. We were looking for team to build on our team, or build on our skill base in the area of publishing here in Krakow in Poland. And suddenly it didn't feel like we needed to hire people in Krakow anymore. It was like, well, we could just basically hire them anywhere. I mean, it doesn't really matter whether they're here or whether they're in another Polish city, whether they're in Germany or wherever. So that was an interesting sort of way of looking at it. And we sort of also found that when it came to porting, usually, Polish companies find other Polish companies to help them with porting. And that, has been sort of the history of Bloober Team and Fiardemic earlier or late, into the end of last year. But we kind of sort of felt like, well, we don't really need to. And a strange thing happened. We ended up finding a company called Dreamloop, which were in Finland. And we liked them. We really liked what they'd done before. We really liked what they told us. And we kind of felt comfortable to take that gamble working with them. And it's been an absolute dream to work with them. They're aptly named, by the way. It has been fantastic working with them. And interestingly enough, I mean, we got very lucky in that Finland has not been that badly affected by coronavirus. So the team have been able to go to the office every day. They've been able to work together and not really have any delays in the whole process. So we've been able to sort of meet all our deadlines and be sort of on track to release Dark Complete Edition on the 4th of December, which is just fantastic. One thing that did come up though, and that everyone would have no doubt experienced in this throughout the pandemic, is that in agreements there's usually some type of clause that allows for wars or strange events to happen. Then all bets are off. So you can sort of I think it's like force majeure, and we had different lawyers trying to add pandemic into this sort of clause. We're going, no, we cannot. Because obviously, the moment you add that into a contract and you are in a pandemic, everything's sort of, all bets are off. So that was sort of kind of one interesting experience of signing contracts throughout the pandemic. I mean, you have to be careful that that's not involved in it, because it sort of like completely cancels out your contract. So getting back to Finland, we were extremely lucky that Finland didn't experience the pandemic that harshly. But the other thing that came up that we just weren't expecting, and for example, in the porting process of any game or Dark Complete Edition, what we would normally do is towards the end of the port, once we start getting builds and before we put them in for certification, we would go to the developer and we would move the developer to the studio, get him to go to the studio and and play through the builds, check the builds, make sure that they are in line with his original version or vision, and then sign them off before they go off to certification. So we got to that stage, and it was like, oh, how are we going to do this? Because Vlad's in Los Angeles, the porting house is in Finland. We can't put him on a plane. We asked, and he said, "There's no way I'm going on a plane." And fair enough. So we had to sort of think about, okay, well, how do we do this? And so my first reaction was, okay, can I find some dev kits to borrow or in Los Angeles? And I called everyone I could think of, and no one had any dev kits that they were willing to lend me. So my second plan B was to go and raid the cupboard. And I know that there was some dev kits sitting in the cupboard that had been collecting dust because everyone's moved on to the next gen. And I thought, okay, I'll just put them in a box and send them over. And Vlad from Unfold can check the build and sign it all off. I asked the legal team and I said, oh, by the way, I'm just going to do this, right? This is a pandemic, right? This should be all right. And they're like, absolutely not. These dev kits are not leaving the building. We are unable to allow them to leave the building because we would be in breach of our agreements. I'm like, oh, okay. So I had to go to I'll just say one platform holder, and I said, one platform holder. This is the dilemma that I'm in, and I explained it all. I read it all down, and there was like 3 days of silence, and I could tell they were just looking at this going, are these guys crazy? I mean, what do you mean? They need a dev kit. What do you mean they need to borrow a dev kit? And but eventually it sort of kind of sunk in, and I got a response back that sort of said, we've looked at your situation. I will lend Vlad from Unfold Games my personal dev kit. I'll do it for you. And then I'm like, oh man, that's fantastic. That is like the most amazing thing I've heard. And so 24 hours later, I get another email, and the email is, we've looked. This company doesn't have an NDA with us. And I'm like going, well, of course not. We're doing the publishing, and we're the port. They're the developer. I mean, if they had an NDA and they had dev kits, I mean, why would they need us to do the port? Mm-hmm. And they're like, okay. So silence for another 24 hours, 48 hours. And then they came back and said, we've got another idea. How about this? We're going to set up a special branch for the game. You actually send it through certification, and we publish it to the store, and only he can see it. And I'm like, oh, okay, this sounds fantastic. So we go through this whole process, and of course, it's never as easy as it seems. They want to actually certify the actual build. They want to certify the store assets, everything, just to get this one person to have a look at the game. But it eventually. We were able to set up that, but one game in the store that he could see, and he was able to download it and test the build, and thank God that happened, because he was able to sort of see things. I mean, obviously from his perspective that the porting team had missed, and they were able to sort of make sure that certain things were there that weren't there previously. So that was sort of kind of a really a good example of, I suppose, platform holders who really, don't know Feardemic or from Barbara. So other than sort of, us talking to them on a daily basis, they're going out of their way and really thinking about how can we help these guys. So I was super impressed with that. Not every platform holder has been like that, I must admit. Some of them have been very not interested, sort it out for yourself. But some of them, one of them has been incredible.
Yeah, I mean, that's an important point. Like the tail end of building a game is one of the challenges I am seeing a lot with publishers, with individuals, with remote teams. When it comes to hardware, that's where people kind of pause a bit. There is this illusion at the beginning of the pandemic where everybody's like, well, I just can keep creating art. I've been doing that. What's the difference if I do it on my own computer versus the company's computer? But like in the background, there was like I think a month or two break, like pumping the brakes for big publishers, big companies to be like, hey, let's hold on, let's figure out this infrastructure. And where before there wasn't an incentive, there was interest, right? A lot of people like, can I work from home on Fridays? There's Thursday, there's always that. And, rightfully denied. It's like, no, right? But now that everyone's forced into this situation where they're going to have to adapt, big companies are already investing in ways to make things work, including dev kits, which is a huge piece of important proprietary hardware that they can't willy-nilly send everyone one. because it used to be like in a cubicle of 5-6 people or a department, they have one dev kit kind of shoot a build over and test it out. How do you do that remotely? So these are the type of challenges I am hearing, and from your own experience that people are echoing throughout the industry is like, all right, I mean, the first part, there's an easier solution, but this end part, actually like testing the game, where there's a lot of trust that has to come with that, and security, that not a lot of companies before, at least, were set up to do, and now they have to figure it out, which is, I see like what the challenges are the last couple of months, especially now that everyone has a company hardware to kind of work from, or they're doing remote working. They're like actually going through VPN and doing remote desktop from their own, computer desktop that they had at the office, right? So there's no data saved on a personal computer. There's a lot of tricks now that never were considered before, that I'm very thankful in hearing that studios are like, all right, let's set this up. Let's do this right. There's a way. We've just been avoiding it because we didn't have to before.
Yeah, I think, and again, I'm not really, involved in the development process. I'm sort of the publishing side, but I mean, I hear everything. There are some roles within the studio, be it creative or art roles, that have really worked, that have found the freedom of working from home a positive experience. On the other hand, there are those that are not enjoying it. And, those that sort of need the input of everyone else, like the programmers that need to understand who's doing what bit and where, who's contributing what, who's rebuilding this today or whatever, who's doing that plugin, and is that plugin working with this? This process is kind of slowing down. And you're right to point out that last part of it, especially once you get into the ports and you're starting to port to all the different platforms, it kind of is a collaborative effort, and the dev kits have, and especially on the console side, and I don't know whether you've noticed, but certainly I have, Holiday 2020 turned into Q1 2021, for most games. And it's all because of that last mile, and particularly in console. And that porting process, it is extremely difficult, and a lot of the sort of the development agreements that you have with the platform holders don't allow you to move these dev kits around as easily as they were, as easily as they need to be in this situation. And from my discussions with the developers that I know, I mean, they're telling me that they're complaining about this. And there seems to be no one seems to be prepared to budge to allow those dev kits to start moving around. Mm-hmm. Now I know just from past experience that people pick them up and move them around all the time, but they do it kind of, unofficially. And look, no one's going to, yell at Bethesda because they're demoing Skyrim on a dev kit in a hotel room somewhere to media, but officially they're sort of saying, no, you still can't take these dev kits away. Even the next generation dev kits, I'm hearing, that there's a lot of restrictions on who can get access to them and who can't. So they're certainly not prepared to allow people to sort of, send one to their developers or send one over to their porting house. It is very difficult. So that's I think where the major issues have lied or have been over the past few months. Is as everyone sort of moved towards that Christmas season and all these games are supposed to be ready, it's sort of been this is not working the way that it should. But hopefully Cyberpunk will be here on the 10th of December. And we'll all be happy again.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. That last part is something I feel like the industry as a whole is figuring out right now. The beginning part too was an issue, and I think a lot of it from talking to experts like yourselves and having people on the show. It seems to be like a personality trait too for people who are really good at working from home and people who are not. And it seems like, like you said, like people just tend to work better in an environment where they're surrounded by their peers, and just the clear division of working and home life. Definitely helps switch that mentality. At least, commuting to the office helps them get into that mode. And most people are really struggling with that. I do want to ask you a general question just to kind of backtrack. We kind of throw the terminology distributed work, which has been around for a while. The last year and a half, especially, have been more popular. But for those listeners who don't know what distributed work means, can you kind of define that a little bit, just to give a general overview of what that is, so people can follow along?
Well, essentially, at the end of the day, it is slicing and dicing the overall work jobs and distributing them to people in remote locations. I will say the one thing that is pretty interesting here, because we deal with a lot of independent developers, and certainly when this pandemic started, a lot of them said to me, Oscar, there's no problems for us because this is what we do all the time, right? I've been working from home for years, developing, doing consulting or doing, building games. And, all my team works remotely. So this is not a problem. But what the problem has been is that everyone's home too. It's not just you anymore sitting in your home office. You've got kids on Zoom. You've got, trying to organize them, trying to organize their classes. And, you can't go out for a walk or blow off steam in a restaurant at night or go to the pub. All that stuff is off. You are literally now a captive in your home and with the rest of your family. So that kind of has been a real a challenge for a lot of people who have had to sort of transition from working from home to working with family at home. Yeah. But generally, I mean, the games industry has been pretty good at distributed work because, I mean, a lot of the time, there's always a lot of outsourcing that's happening. But within those teams of outsourcing, I mean, again, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Some people are good at it, are good at working with themselves on their own clock, and some people just aren't for various different reasons. But at the end of the day, I mean, everyone's sort of kind of, living and learning through this. It's what's going to be really interesting is whether we choose to go back to what we were doing before. And I think, a country like where I'm at the moment, Poland, it's not as sort of open to work from home as, say, the US is or other countries are. It's still very much a place where, well, certainly before the pandemic, where people would go to the office, people would go to the studio, and everyone would work together as a sort of a group or a unit. So it's going to be really interesting to see whether people go back to that. But getting back to your point, I mean, as far as distributed work goes, the games industry or the software industry in general is pretty good at that, because we've been doing it for a very long, long time. But, I think, I mean, there's a real difference to how we distributed work previously to how we distribute work now, because, because there's so many other things that are happening in people's homes other than just work.
Yeah. And all these different factors that are kind of pushing people to head back to work, right? Like I need to get away from my family. That's my break. Some people use that as an excuse, but kind of to use that as a jumping off point. Like, there's a couple of vaccines already in the works. It's probably going to be 6 months till, first public people are able to access it. And it takes even longer than that for people to fully adapt it where everyone's taking it, where it takes effect, right? What kind of conversations are you hearing through friends and network, yourself, your company, to provide us a little more insight of what is life after the pandemic? Is it going to be a hybrid approach? Is it going to be mostly distributed and remote? What kind of conversations are you hearing to kind of relate to the listeners out there?
Really, I mean, just my team and just our internal arrangement, everyone wants to get back to the office.
Yeah.
So, I think we all kind of miss that sort of collaborative sort of effort of being able to walk down to finance and sort something out, or go over to 2D art, or go up to QA department and get some advice on a problem. I mean, we all really miss that. I mean, especially, I can definitely certainly speak to the examples in game publishing. I mean, we are basically charged with marketing and sales, and that process, it really is a collaborative process. It really is a sort of like, to understand what the marketing team's doing, what the programmatic team's doing, and be able to sort of meet on a daily sort of basis and really toss around some ideas. It just is not the same on Zoom. I suppose it was okay for the first couple of months, but after 9 months now, it's getting really tired, and we're really struggling to sort of keep up the sort of the pace and the enthusiasm on a day-to-day basis. So, and that's just internally. So we're dying to get back in the office and talk to each other again. Externally, the other thing that we are doing on a day-to-day basis is we're looking for games to publish. And before pandemic, we would be at Games Connection, we would be at E3, we'd be at Gamescom, we'd be all these places talking to people, finding out what they're doing, what new games are coming, scouring the floor for independent games. And we can't do that now. So we're kind of like basically, every day surfing the internet and sending blind emails to people, asking for them, hey, you looking for a publisher? And so I think, from that respect, it's kind of difficult as well. And I think as soon as this pandemic is over, as soon as we can get back on a plane again, I think this industry is going to be running out the door, running to an airport and running to a show near you to get out again and meet like-minded people and look for new games to publish. So I think, there's two sides of it there. We all want to get back to the office, and we all want to get back to E3 next year, or Gamescom, or however soon we can get somewhere else.
So kind of use that to talk about the next thing. You're mentioning indie game publishing. Mm-hmm. What are the differences are you seeing besides of course going to these conventions to kind of meet these potential indie developers to publish? What other differences are you seeing right now? Because I think the common misconception, there's one side where there's so many games that are always out. So there's always a fear, I think, for game developers to be like, can I offer something new? Is it viable? Is it something that I can get published? When I talk to publishers, like yourself, you're always talking about, we're looking for more indie games to publish. There's not a shortage of indie games to publish, at least good games, right? Would you kind of like give us a clear picture of why is there such a discrepancy from game developers themselves feeling a certain way, and then to actual people with the money wanting to publish these type of games?
Well, the simple answer to that is the people with the money want to publish Fortnite. So there's only one Fortnite, right? Look, that's a really interesting question, and it kind of it's almost like you hear it all the time. I mean, I'm trying to fill these positions in my office. We're a famous company, and yet I can't find anyone to fill these roles. And yet you go and talk to people who talk to kids that have no jobs, and they're saying, "Well, we can't find a job." And there seems to be there's always this mismatch. And I think there's a lot of games out there, but as a publisher, you're kind of looking for the one that sort of that you can that fits with your company thesis, and that has a potential to cut through. Because there's so many games out there. The barrier to entry now to creating games it has sort of kind of dropped. All the tools are available. You can download a copy of Unreal Unity and off you go, and you can create a PC game. So there's no shortage of games being released. But what the trick is finding the one that has something unique about it that is going to be able to get people interested in and engage an audience. That's kind of the trick. And, anyone that tells you what they know what that recipe is a liar, because, in all the years that I've been in the games business, I've never met anyone that can pick a winner all the time. Sometimes you can pick a winner, but it is very, very difficult. There's a lot of games out there at the moment that have not been able to find an audience. That if they did find an audience, they could have been a lot bigger than they were. But it's tough. I mean, I've got dozens and dozens of stories about games that came across my desk that just didn't look that impressive, and no one really wanted it. They turned out to be absolute enormous games. So it's very, very hard to tell, but you're always looking for this something special, and you don't know what that something special is, and it's really hard to recognize. Sometimes you've got to be lucky, and sometimes you are lucky, and sometimes you get something without even knowing that it's special. But then when you've got it, it turns into something special. So it's a great industry, and that's what makes it so exciting. But one of the things that everyone indie games publishers developers are always asking me is sort of like, well, why do I need a publisher for? Why do I need you? And it's sort of like, well, you don't. You can publish your own game quite easily. But, at the end of the day, because we are engaged in the process of sales and marketing and have been for many, many years, we're probably better at it than you. The same way that, you're probably better at developing a game than I am, because I have no idea how to use Unity. And that at the end of the day is it. It's very hard to be good at everything. You can either be good at developing games and organizing your team of developers, or you can be good at packaging them up and bringing them to market. It's very, very difficult to be both.
What percentage would you say when coming across something special is attributed to the content or the team? Is there a formula there that sometimes usually works for you, or is it purely about, you guys can be faceless developers, let me see the end result, or is it vice versa? I mean, how much of that is a combination of the two?
Yeah, I think the answer to that kind of lies in the fact that people buy studios all the time. Mm-hmm. And they buy studios because of the experience that team has, rather than putting together one of their own. I think if you look at any studio that's had a big hit or a successful game, and you have a look what they've done already, you will find that successful game is not their first. There's been quite a few beforehand that they've done that have allowed them to find a rhythm, to understand each other, and really sort of get inside each other's heads and know how to work together to deliver something that's got some sort of spark. And one of the things about Bloober Team is a good example of that. I mean, Layers of Fear was kind of sort of seemed to come out of nowhere, but Bloober Team had been doing work for hire before that, and they had another game before that. So very rarely do you find a game that's someone's first game that's been successful. There is, of course, examples of that. Dark Complete Edition, or Dark, DARQ. This is a game we're publishing. That was Vlad's first game. This is his first foray into actually development, and he did everything himself. It's been one of the most successful indie games of the last 12 months. So there's always exceptions to the rule, and that's what makes this business so exciting. But generally speaking, it's the chances of a team, a small team or a large team, having a hit game, their first game, is very, very it's very small.
What kind of cautionary tales that you can relay, just from experience, just from how you've seen, there was a spark and then it didn't come to fruition, or vice versa? It wasn't, you didn't think much of it, but then it became a huge success. Like how much of that can you help formulate with these developers that eventually became something?
Yeah, well, I think that the classic story that I have is, I think the most well-known story is that of The Witcher, right? Mm-hmm. I mentioned earlier I was with Atari, and if you had bought the first Witcher on PC, you would have seen the Atari logo in the bottom left-hand corner. Now, they came to Atari because they'd been everywhere else, and Atari was their last port of call, and nobody else wanted that game. And if you can imagine the market around that time, World of Warcraft had just come out, and everyone had gone, that's it. It's all about multiplayer. No one's going to want to play a single game ever again. And so, CD Projekt come knocking on everyone's door with this single player game that was based on a book written by an author that outside of Poland no one really knew, and also it was kind of their first game as well, so the chances of it being successful the odds were stacked against it, and the way the deal was struck, it was reflected that, and I remember meeting those guys in Leipzig the first time, and we were kind of like, oh yeah, right. Okay, we'll do our best. And, I remember going home and the stock arrived in Asia, and, and I'd been very, very conservative because I didn't want to have a warehouse full of games. And literally it was all gone on the first day. And I'm sitting there scratching my head going, my God, what is this thing? And, my sales guy at the time is like, man, I've just read the book. The book is fantastic. This is amazing. And it kind of started that way. So, I don't think, within Atari at that particular point in time, there was no expectation that The Witcher was going to be a huge hit. It was an interesting game, but it was single play in a time where everyone thought that multiplayer was the way. So that sort of kind of turned out to be a sort of a good story. Just staying with the AAAs, and another one was Rage. The first time I saw Rage, I thought that was going to be a huge hit. It looked like the most fantastic thing ever. I mean, it was ID's first new IP in a long, long time. And what I saw of it, the gameplay was just really great. The graphics were fantastic. I mean, for its time, it looked great, but it came out and it was a disaster. I had pallets and pallets and pallets of stock all over Asia, and I was just stuck with it. So that was that was almost the opposite of The Witcher. But luckily Skyrim came shortly thereafter. So yeah, it is really, really hard. I mean, more recently, I've been speaking to indie developers. They're talking about, okay, well, how do I fund my game projects? Should I get a publisher to give me money? And I keep on saying to them, look, publisher giving you an advance against sales is probably the last thing that you want to do. That's absolutely the last option, because there's a couple of things that happen here. It means that the revenue that you get from the game is kicked way down the road until that debt is paid off. So you can be 6-7 months without revenue after you drop the game, and because you've already been paid the money. And that's when you really need the money anyway, as you're sort of starting a new project. And the other thing that can happen as well is if you accept money from a publisher in an advance, your relationship can change as well. In my experience, I've seen this happen before, where the relationship goes from the publisher sort of developer relationship to almost like client and customer, or this customer client relationship, whereas like, well, hang on, because the publisher is the one paying all the salaries and delivering the money every month. The developer sort of finds itself completely enslaved to the project, and anything the publisher says, they're implementing it. So they lose control of that, the whole process, and it's no longer theirs anymore. It's no longer their dream. They're not making their dream. They're making what the publisher, tells them that they should make so that they can achieve the milestone and get paid. So look, it's kind of complicated. And get back to your original point. I mean, finding that magic spark, my God, it is really, really difficult. And I suppose that's why we celebrate them so much when a game comes out that is really special or magical. We rave about it because, everyone knows how hard it is for all those things to come together and for that spark to be there.
So what is the ideal relationship between a publisher and a creative, if there ever is one?
Well, funnily enough, I mean, if you look at the big publishers and the studios that they work with, a lot of the studios are owned by them. So once, I mean, and if a studio and the publisher are all owned by the same people and all have the same bosses, it's much easier for them to align their interests. When they all have separate owners and separate shareholders, and it takes a little bit of a dance to get everyone on the same page, and that's kind of the challenge. I mean. Yeah, I mean, again, it's a difficult one because there's no real magic formula here. I mean, if there was a magic formula, EA would have worked it out, and they'd be the only game publisher on the planet. But there isn't a formula, luckily, or thank God, and it allows for these unlimited combinations of things to come together. But I mean, I think my advice to all independent developers is just be very careful about how you sort of what your short-term plans are as opposed to your long-term plans, and always have one eye on the long term and one eye on the short term. Obviously, next month you've got to pay wages, but obviously, on the other hand, in 2 or 3 years, you still need to have control of that company, and it's a big balancing act. And I mean, I think it's okay when there's sort of one person, 2, 3 people. It's much more manageable. But when I see people getting really sort of finding themselves in difficult positions, is when their studios hits that magic number of about 30 or 40 people. It starts getting really hard to sort of to manage as an independent unit. But and a lot of developers, who get to that size, sort of kind of come to the conclusion that maybe I should publish my own games as well, and that way I can sort of manage the cash flow a little more. But then there's the other hand of bringing the expertise on to cover that part of it, and developing that side of the business, which is a very, very different type of business than developing a game.
One of the things that you were mentioning before, how the dangers of chasing trends, right? Especially for a publisher, or how chasing trends can lead to having developers on the other side making surprise hits, right? Just doing the unexpected, doing something different. One of the biggest topics that have been going through at least this podcast, but into the game dev community, is the whole streaming thing, right? Streaming, to me, I've always been not sure about, because it's very much a part of game development, but not a part of game developers' control, right? It is, especially for indie games, where I feel like it's still a very contained experience, and in most cases, you can't make it Red Dead, right? So you can't experience what streamability of a game usually has success in, which is replayability, multiplayer, all this stuff. Another point, you were talking about how multiplayer was a trend before. Every game had to have a multiplayer, and we would have games like Spider-Man, God of War, a bunch of indie games that don't follow that formula and became success. So what I'm asking you is, like, I would love to kind of hear your thoughts about, the last couple of months, especially the streaming community, game developer community have been talking about, what is this model? Because now that Twitch, Facebook, YouTube, all these huge platforms talk directly to streamers, but game developers are kind of left out of that talk, which is very odd. I think the last biggest thing was the whole DMC thing with Twitch taking videos down that had music, but for some reason, 8 hours of gameplay isn't a part of that factor, which is kind of weird too. And I feel free to kind of dodge this. I know this is a touchy subject, but being an indie game publisher, I would love to kind of hear your thoughts about that whole side of game developers that gets weird when people start talking about it.
Yeah, look, I think, one of the things you mentioned about that is developing for particular trends. And, the development cycles are so long. I mean, even short development cycles from scratch is like 3 years, or 2 years is just like, a sprint. But even what is popular now, what is trending and happening now is not necessarily going to be popular in 2 or 3 years. That is the hard thing. And if you try and, make what's popular today, I can almost guarantee you that in 3 years, people would have moved on. So I kind of, and again, it goes back to that. As a publisher, what are you looking for in a game? You're just looking for something different, something magical that, maybe no one else has spotted, simply because, it's very hard to sort of, predict what the future is. I mean, the closest way of predicting the future is trying to find young people and looking what they're doing today. And I think, I suppose Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft are really, big examples of, what sort of 10, 12-year-old kids are doing, because those kids are, essentially being trained in mechanics that they will be looking for in 4 or 5 years, or take for granted in 4 or 5 years, when they're sort of looking for more adult gaming experiences. So I mean, if you're going to try and predict the future, you can, I suppose, start with, your future customers. What are they doing now? What are they interested in now? How are they consuming content now? What are their expectations going to be in 4 years, 5 years, when you've finished building your masterpiece? So that's one part of it. Moving on to the streaming part of things. So yeah, that's a really bizarre one, because I understand how entertaining. Hang on, sorry. Yeah. Guys, please, thanks. Sorry. As I said, kids at home.
No worries. I got some of my own too. Yeah.
The whole streaming thing is really, really amazing. I mean, I understand how entertaining it is to watch people playing games. But from a developer's point of view, you don't make any revenue from that. But on the other hand, what else do we do? Because, traditional gaming media is almost being rendered irrelevant. I really, streamers, people talking about your game, everyone's the media now. It's really hard to manage, but it is part and parcel of the environment that we work with. So you need as many people playing your game or streaming your game as possible, but it's not always easy or possible to sort of manipulate that. I mean, I think we've all tried it. We've all tried, paying streamers. We've all tried, giving out tons of free keys. But, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I think for it to work, it just needs to be genuine, and it just needs to sort of, come from a place of passion, and, just have that magical ingredient, be the right thing at the right particular point in time, and it will work on its own. So again, I mean, I wish I had the recipe and I could just share, this is what you do. You do this, you do that, you do this, you talk to this guy, and you get this guy to stream it, and you're going to have a hit. But it ain't that easy. It really isn't. It's a whole combination of lots of things. And streamers are now a big part of it, YouTubers. And it's also, oddly enough, and it's the negative as well. You've sometimes got to, I suppose, court the negative, because the negative is as useful to you as the positive. If you know what I mean, because positive. Having someone say, "Oh, look, it's a really nice game. It's a great game. It's a beautiful game. It's a pretty game." It's not going to travel. If someone says, if someone says it's the most offensive damn thing that I've ever seen in my life, I was absolutely shocked and appalled. That will travel. Mm-hmm. So, it throws up some interesting dilemma for marketers, because it's sort of like, well, how do you control? You need the negative, but how do you control it? The positive's great, but it doesn't help you. So it's kind of, a difficult one. I wish I had the answer to it, but I'll give you a good example of something that is quoted negatively or perceived as negatively, but it's worked really well. I mean, going back to a game that we're releasing soon on PlayStation and Xbox, Dark. Now, people know Dark. The first time people heard of Dark was an incident that happened with Epic Game Store, that Epic wanted to take the game and wouldn't take it unless it was exclusive. Mm. And the developer said, no, I'm not going to do that. And then wrote a blog on Reddit about why he chose not to go down that path. And there became like a secondary sort of conversation. It's like, the big guy always pushing the little guy and throwing their weight around. And that kind of angle allowed it to develop a life of its own, and it became this amazingly viral story. And as a result, people were streaming the game, people were YouTubing the game. I mean, that sort of independent media was, or that sort of media of one was, taking on a life of its own, and the game was building. And then there was another article that the developer wrote on the amount of publishers that actually came to them, and the sort of kind of game pitches that they were getting about, you'll never succeed without us, you will need to give us your IP, all these types of things. And again, I think a lot of people sort of identified or resonated with that sort of story. And because it was kind of, to some degree, a little bit negative, it traveled a lot more so than if it was just a simple, like, hey, this game is really, really great. This game is fantastic. So it's a delicate topic, and it's really difficult to find a balance. I mean, sometimes it can go wrong when and I suppose the best example, or the I suppose the most punishing example for me personally was Elder Scrolls Online. That was kind of the first time that I really sort of felt the sting of YouTube and streamers. I mean, I know it's going back a fair way now, a few years now, but when that came out, if you cast your mind back, I mean, it was absolutely torn apart. People, basically approached that as a sport and tearing it apart. And that was really the first time that I'd come across it. And unfortunately, I had several thousand copies of it, more than several thousand copies of it. At that particular point, sitting on pallets that just could not be sold just because of that. So yeah, it is a really difficult sort of I suppose path to tread, but it is part and parcel of the environment that we work in these days, and we just got to accept that that's it. I suppose it was like the first time customer reviews became a thing on Steam. Everyone was like, oh great, we wanted positive reviews. Mm-hmm. Then all these negative reviews started coming, and everyone was like, oh my God, this is just a disaster. But oddly enough, if you talk to people about how they purchase games on Steam, a lot of them will say, well, the first thing I do is read the negative reviews. And the reason I read the negative reviews is because it gives me all the reasons why I shouldn't buy it. And if I can't find someone that can convince me why I shouldn't buy it, well, then I'll buy it.
It's so true. Just kind of sign off on that. Like, I always equate the game industry with the movie industry. The movie industry being more transparent with data, because I feel a lot of what games and what you guys do is very difficult because we're not very transparent with that stuff. You know, with box office, with genres, we can go to Rotten Tomatoes, we can go to Box Office Mojo and get an idea of what the trends are and what's being receptive to the global audience or even the U.S. audience or a certain country. Like they have it down to a T, where our publishers overall across the world don't do that, which is very odd because I feel like all that data would help everybody. But even then, they still have flops and problems because there are variables that haven't been defined and probably will never be defined based on all these ecosystem and changes in the environment or topics or everything that culminates into something that where a creative outlet is presented, it either hits or flops, and that's just stuff will always be out of our hands as game developers. And so I always go back to that because it feels very familiar. We have less data to work with, but we're still, it's still like a gamble. Just like the movie industry.
Yeah, and look, a lot of people, kind of have told me. I mean, even my boss will tell you, like, we're not competing with other games companies. We're competing with the movie business. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is what we're doing here. We're building entertainment. We have perhaps true multimedia, whereas other entertainment platforms aren't that sort of. Is not considered multimedia. It's much more linear in its approach and in its production. But at the end of the day, we're competing with the amount of time. We're competing for all the amount of time that an end user or customer has, and that's 24 hours in a day. I mean, it's never going to change. Whether they're watching movies, listening to music, or playing games, that's going to eat into their available leisure time. So we are all competing for the same thing. Data is a kind of an interesting one. There is data out there, but it's kind of, the stuff that you want is other people's competitive data. So, but I can understand why people don't want to share that sort of stuff. But it would help. But I think the movie business is kind of is a lot more mature than the games business. But the games business is pretty mature these days. I mean, it's pretty hard to say that it's not. But the games business has been around for a while. But I will say that the movie business is a great indicator of where we're going. I'm seeing. Or everyone moving. I mean, there's Game Pass and PlayStation are sort of coming up with something that's sort of similar, and it's all looking very close to a subscription. And I think we're going down that path. And and it's interesting if you have a look at the games industry. It's only really been in the last 5-6 years, maybe a bit longer, that we've had independent games, right? Before that, the barrier to entry was way too high because things like Unreal and Unity weren't free. You had to pay for these really expensive licenses, and so there wasn't a huge amount of competition. Now it's a huge amount of competition because the barrier to entry is lowered. Same things happened in film. The cost of cameras, production, editing, all those things have really just disappeared, and so there's so much content out there, and I think that's going to happen with games if it hasn't happened already. And I think one of the big lessons from Netflix, and before Netflix existed, or that streaming model, everyone would say there's no way we can create quality content unless we can sell it to different networks around the world, and have various different markets, from cinema to planes to DVD to Asian markets, European markets, et cetera, and it's only through putting together all those different markets and selling them to different customers at different prices can we make quality content. Mm-hmm. That was totally wrong, because the quality of content now that is being delivered by Netflix and HBO and all those guys is just astounding. I mean, the budgets are huge. It goes against everything that everyone used to say about the idea of streaming. And I think the same thing will happen with games as well, in that once we start committing to a model where players pay a certain fee per month to access content, then content will come kind of rise to the challenge, or the quality of the content will rise to the challenge, so it becomes really, really engaging. Easier done than said, or easier said than done. But I think that that's going to be the end result. That the industry will work out how to deal with a subscription gaming model, and they will learn really fast and really well. And I think the quality of entertainment will continue to just get better and better.
Yeah. Just to kind of sign off with that, with my last thought on that, like I think it's very, very, very common for us to always look at the movie industry like what's next for the game industry. The one thing I do say that the game industry got out of first was, the arcades. I mean, Dave and Buster's and all these like fun weekend things to do, but it used to be an everyday thing when I was growing up. But now it's just like a thing that you do once in a while. Because of the pandemic, the movie industry is on a crazy collapse, or rethinking of how they distribute movies. And so I feel like theater is slowly making that type of exit where arcades are right now. And unfortunately, that also means a lot of the data that we get from these box office numbers in the weekends are from theater chains. They're not from the companies themselves, right? It's from the theater chains for counting. So I feel like that number might go away because, like Netflix, they don't share their numbers. They don't have to, which I feel is one of the unfortunate things about that. I don't think theaters are going to go away forever. I think more than anything, once the vaccine is around and people can, like you said, leave their homes, they want to rush back to work. They want to go to the theaters. They want to do something. But I think it's changed in a way. It's not going to be the same, where it's not a thing as much. Netflix kind of figured that out a long time ago, that people, if you can enjoy, people have pretty nice home sets. I mean, I know I'm looking towards Black Friday to kind of upgrade my home theater system. I want to feel like, what I'm used to getting at the theater, and some sort of normalcy there. And people are doing that right now. They're upgrading their homes. Or are they okay with where they're living? Are they okay with who they're with? The kids, you're stuck with them. But like everyone's reevaluating, their situation right now to look forward ahead of what the rest of the life is. And the pandemic, if anything, I think in that regard, at least, I mean, of course it's horrific, but in that regard, it's helping a lot of people just get their life in order. You're seeing like a huge exodus, from these major cities where it used to be okay living in a closet, right? When now they're like, I don't want to live in a closet anymore. It's just not worth it.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it has been an opportunity for a lot of people to rethink their sort of situations in their life and what's important. And but I do think that as you say, I think people will want to go back to the cinema at some point. I don't think it's going to disappear totally. I think it will be different. It won't be as sort of big as it is at the moment. That box office number will probably be less important as an indicator of the success of a film or a movie. As you say, Netflix doesn't share their data only to their shareholders, but they don't share individual production data. But it's look, it's an interesting time to be in entertainment, and I've been in entertainment all my life. I mean, I started off with music before I ended up in games, so I have not had any exposure to anything else. It's always been entertainment. And one thing that's been constant as the carriages changed and the way we distributed content changed is the demand for it. The demand for it never abates. There's never been a time that I can remember where people did not want to be entertained, that did not want to be made feel good by a external story, and we are in the business of telling stories, the same way the movie business is, the same way all entertainment is. We tell stories in a different way. We tell stories with multimedia, and we tell these sort of big, long, complicated stories a lot of the time with a lot of lean forward experience. So I don't think that's going away anytime soon. I'm really, bullish about, the entertainment industry. I mean, especially, if you see the way companies like Minecraft and Roblox are doing, I mean, all those people are our future customers. When I speak about that, I speak the AAA or the more adult experiences that are created. All those people that they're engaging now are our future customers, and there is more of them than there ever has been in history. So, I think the next 5-6 years are going to bode well for the games industry. It might look a bit different than it does today, and it may be a little easier to manage from a perspective of buying games. You might just be able to pay a single subscription and access your entire Steam and the entire Steam library. But it's going to be good. It's going to be good fun.
All right. Well, we are at the hour mark, and I want to thank you for coming on to the show and sharing your experience. This is the part of the podcast where I actually hand the mic over to you to give a shout out, give attention to any cause or any game or anything of that sort. So the mic is yours, Matt.
Well, the only thing that you really need to know about December, other than Cyberpunk, is that there is a great game called Dark Complete Edition coming to Xbox One and PlayStation 4. It has been one of the most successful games on PC over the last 12 months, successful indie games. It's a award-winning classic of a game, and I think it will become a mainstay of the independent scene over the next 12 months. I think the more people who become exposed to it, who see it, are absolutely just gobsmacked of how beautiful it is and how well it plays. So, Dark Complete Edition, don't miss it.
All right. Of course, the link and everything will be included in this episode. I want to thank you again, and for the last. Well, maybe not the last time. We'll keep talking, of course. That's it for the show. Thank you, guys. See you next week.